Okay, thank you very much, Josh. And before I start, I'd also like to thank Josh for setting this up and for the invitation. I will try to be as clear, and because you people aren't going to be able to respond real time back until a break, I'll try to speak slowly and as clearly as possible. And I'll be speaking off of a 6-page PDF document that Josh circulated, and I'll be talking, it says key items. I think it has the big letter F, and under that it has 8 different numbered items, and a couple of them have 1.1, 1.2, etc. Okay, I'll go ahead and start. The first one is 1.1. The first one is information from smart meters available to customers, the basis for the utility company conservation claims. And I will back up initially and talk a little more generally about smart meters. And from the utility company perspective and what they've been reporting, with smart meters, the utility companies are saying that they'll be able to conserve energy, and therefore they'll be able to build fewer power plants, and therefore it'll be a green program, it'll be environmentally clean, and good things will happen, the kind of things that people want. Well, what I would like to do is look a little bit closer at the specifics of what the smart meters do. And obviously the smart meters themselves do not save energy. If anything, the smart meters use energy. But let's look at the other side, that if the smart meters can provide specific detailed information about an individual's energy use, that person could have the potential to use that information to fine-tune their energy use, and possibly, if they were motivated, to conserve energy. And then we could save energy if lots and lots of people did this, and if we did it cumulatively. So what I'm going to give as an example is, suppose that we could get the information that showed me that my toaster oven for 3.5 hours used less electricity at a pretty high setting than my big oven did. And if I realized that, obviously I would switch almost exclusively to my toaster oven, and I might even change my behavior to doing small portions so that I could cook almost exclusively in the toaster oven. Similarly, if I look at space heaters, and I see that the one in my bedroom number 1 is incredibly efficient. It's not using much, but the one in bedroom number 2 is a energy hog. Then obviously I'm going to use the number 1 heater more, and when I go to purchase another one, I'll purchase one the same or similar. So with this kind of information, I can fine-tune my energy use and conserve energy. Similarly, if I look at my, say, pool pump, and I've got my pool pump coming on every other day for only 20 minutes, but I notice that it's actually costing me half of my total energy use. Well, I can go out on my own or hire the kid up the street that's been asking me anyway and have somebody come over and skim the pool, pay actual labor to replace the electrical use. So if this kind of information was available to us, we really could fine-tune our energy use if we chose to and make better. But what I'm going to say is, and by the way, I'm going to insert this. I'm from California, Northern California, and I'll be speaking mostly and very much based on the Pacific Gas and Electric Company, PG&E in California, and it's probably 99+% relevant to all of the rest of you, because PG&E isn't just one of the largest in the United States, but it's one of the very first implementing this program. Not the very, very first, but the first large one. And many utility companies across the United States and even Canada are looking to PG&E's experience to see how it goes and adjust off of it. So this should be very relevant to most all utility companies. But I would ask all of you that to check all the information we're talking about and make sure that it absolutely applies for your company. So let's look at the specific information, and this is what PG&E and many of the utility companies say, and some certainly with sincerity. They're saying, we're going to give you the detailed information. In fact, some of the utility companies are giving us information even in 15-minute increments. Now, typically, the information isn't real time. It's typically 18 hours to 48 hours after the event. But even so, if we could get the specific information, we might be able to adjust our behavior. But what we're seeing is that we're getting not the specific information of the various electrical devices in our home, but rather we're getting the total kilowatts per hour usage in 15-minute increments. And the problem with that is we don't know which electrical devices were on at that time, say 37 hours ago. And equally as importantly, we don't know how much each electrical device was using. So if you want to consider an equivalent to that, imagine when you get your credit card bill. And imagine for whatever reason you wanted to conserve on your spending, whether it was a personal choice or something for the benefit of your country. Like there was some kind of I hate to use war, something else that the country wanted to do, and they asked the people to save the resources so that they could use them for space exploration or for some other quality program. So if you look at your credit card bill and you see you purchased hats, you purchased shoes, you purchased restaurant meals, you purchased grocery store items, the simple adjustment would be, well, the hats were just a hobby. The shoes are not really functional. They're just kind of a collection of mine. The restaurant meals are a bit extravagant. So what I'll do is I'll cut down on those particular items, and I'll buy more grocery store food, and we'll cook at home, or we'll make our own meals. And that would cut down on resources used. Okay, now if we had that equivalent information with energy, we might be able to make those individual choices. But again, with the credit card, suppose it only showed that during an hour period back 37 days ago, you spent $241.37. Well, if you don't know how many purchases that included, and you don't know which individual purchases that was made up of, you would have no way to fine-tune those purchases to reduce your spending. And that's unfortunately the problem that we're seeing with the utility company information that customers receive from the smart meters when going on the website of the utility company. Unfortunately, also, people are tired when they get home, and very few are willing to sign up on the utility site and then sign in. Very few people even look at their utility bill. So it's difficult when we go out into the field to check what people are doing. We find it's difficult to get people coming home after work being tired to go on the website. Other people that have gone on, we're asking questions, and we're finding that they see, there's a lot of information. They didn't particularly use it or take the time to use it, but they're assuming that other people must be. But we're really having a difficult time finding anyone that's able to use the actual information. Because obviously, again, we're talking about totals, so I can't differentiate the example I gave between my oven, my toaster oven, my pool pump, number one heater, light bulbs, refrigerator, the ice maker, and every single other electrical device. If I can't identify them individually and don't know which ones are causing me the charges, it's going to be it's nearly impossible to make better choices. And when some people say, no, I use the information, well, if someone tells me that they use their speedometer in their car to tell time, I wouldn't know how to do that, and I really doubt that they are as well. Anyway, so that's 1-1, information from smart meters available to customers. And, okay, let me jump right now into 1.2, information available to utility company. Now, the information available to the utility company is quite different because they don't censor the information to themselves. They don't select the information. And when they get the information, they don't then have to wait for it, 24, 36, 48 hours. And there have been some statements made about the utility company not knowing the details of the activities in our home, the electrical device activities. But what we found is, and in the document that I'll look at, in the PDF, you have the third page is executive summary, I believe, whatever page it is. It's called Roman numeral V. It says executive summary, and page number 3. And both of these pages show individual electrical device usage, and this information is taken from the smart meter data. Now, originally, to get this kind of data, people thought that we'd have to put little transmitters on every electrical device, which would be a bit cumbersome. But evidently, and in this report, the document that these pages come from is a privacy document submitted to the Colorado Public Utility Company in 2009 that shows from the total smart meter data that the utility company receives, the software can recreate the individual devices that created that total. And if you think, well, how could it do that? Well, if you imagine a diagram with just two axes, one is horizontal and one is vertical, and on the horizontal axis is time, and on the vertical axis is power. And there are an infinite number of different rises on the vertical as we move over on the horizontal time axis, or there are similar, what I'm saying is there are an infinite number of unique signatures possible. And since we have a very small, finite number of actual electrical devices that we use in our homes, it's very easy to distinguish one from the other. So with the software can identify individual devices. So in fact, the utility company can identify it's the refrigerator, the ice maker, the defroster, the a variety of medical devices, the TV channel, and that's such an easy one. That's just a different frequency when you think of that. Different light bulb draws, toaster ovens, certain devices of electricity that some people would think are very private and they wouldn't want other people to even know they have in their homes. They all have their unique signature. And an equivalent example, if you're not real familiar with electricity, might be software that takes a concert, a symphony, and it's one massive sound possibly to an uneducated ear, but the software can take the total symphony and plot out the individual viola and violin and the drums and the trumpet and the trombone and every single instrument that came on, when it came on, and its volume and how long it was on. And, computers and software make these kind of systematic events and recording of these events very, very possible these days. And at this point, I would say that if there is some disagreement on whether this can be done or not, I would say that these two diagrams you have in this PDF file are very compelling to demonstrate this. So we've now talked about the information, and let's make sure we're contrasting this. The information the customer gets, given that it comes through the utility company onto their website, is very, very limited. Whereas the information that the utility company gets is complete, and there's software available that can dissect it essentially, and essentially see everything going on electrically in our homes. And because so many things that we do are electrical today, it really shows a significant portion of the activity in our homes. Okay, and then now we're going to go on to hackers. Now, hackers certainly don't go on to our website, and hackers are receiving the same information that the utility company, let's call it skilled hackers, because there's millions and millions of smart meters attached to the outside of homes. It's essentially impossible to totally exclude all hacking. It's not a high security initiation. High security would be from one absolute source, but since these meters are essentially spewing from millions of sources and they're attached to the sides of homes, skilled hackers should be able to receive these signals. And they could be using similar software or specialized software to show even different relationships that they want to see. And some of the very basic ones that we might want to be alerted to, or that we may want to be alert ourselves to, is that if a hacker is looking at a pattern of electrical use and they see that every Monday through Friday that electrical use essentially goes off from 7:45 until 4:30, other than this tiny, tiny steady stream for 8 hours, which could be a FM radio or something like that. And then all of a sudden, between 4:30 and 4:42, lots and lots of things come on, and pretty consistently at that time. It would be pretty easy for any of us to see these people, the whole household must go to work and come home a little bit after 4:30. So it wouldn't be difficult for skilled hackers to know different homes in a community when they're not home. And a little more concerning than that is, suppose the skilled hackers are looking at patterns that show Mondays and Thursdays from 2:30 to 6 o'clock, that they see exclusively electrical device usage that is typically used by young children, say a 9-year-old babysitting a 5-year-old. And it means that there's no hair dryers, no dishwashers, no clothes dryers, no whatever. I'll let some of you. I'm sure there's a lot of expertise out there in what kind of activities are done by teenagers, by young adults, by senior citizens. And with skilled hackers recognizing that pattern, they would then, with a very high level of probability, know at what times and what patterns, times and days, they would expect to find unsupervised by adults, young children. And this is something that could be of considerable concern, because that's not the kind of thing. And unfortunately in California, because of the economics, we're finding that more and more people, because they simply can't afford the babysitters, are tending to leave children, younger children in the home alone. And, sometimes, like I say, an 8, a 9, a 10-year-old looking out after a 5 or 6-year-old. And this isn't totally uncommon in California, so I suppose it's not uncommon across the country and in Canada. I can open it up to questions at this time.
Okay, so if you haven't, that was great, Glenn. Thank you. If you have any questions, anyone, now is the time. Hit 5-star if you have any questions on the privacy aspect. Glenn, just in the meantime, I have a question on the collection of data. And you live in California, and I heard that the Power Commission in California, the Utility Commission, has already approved PG&E selling that data to a third-party marketing company. Can you confirm that, or can you talk about that?
Yes, I will. That's correct. It's called the Public Utility Commission. And some of you, by the way, have private utility companies, that are supplying, and some of you have utility companies that isn't really a utility company, it's your city or your municipality. So that may have some different political angles, but the delivery of information should be quite similar. So yes, the Public Utility Commission, under the area of security, has given the PG&E utility company in California permission to sell the information, and in fact, they've encouraged them to do so, and they're representing that this information will help people throughout California. And others, and now I'm just, I want to be clear, like this talk, I'm actually doing this number one just to get our feet wet and get you guys, you people on the phone, used to hearing my voice, because really number 2 and number 3 are the meat of this talk. But many people are predicting that because mass merchandisers want this information, because appliance manufacturers have been dying for this information, they only know what happens to their appliance at point of sale. They have yet been able to come into the home to know exactly how are our products used. So they've been dying for this information. Insurance companies, people are concerned that if they get this information, they'll be recognizing that this household is using a variety of medical devices, and they may want to know why, prior to covering insurance. And of course, law enforcement is already using this information in quite a few states across the United States. So yes, the Public Utility Commission is encouraging the utility company to use this, and economists are projecting that because once the systems are set up to provide this information, and the information will be able to be sorted and in rows and columns and the detail information given to various purchasers, it will be a tremendous moneymaker for the utility company, because just like I imagine you all know what spreadsheets look like, I can send column information, row information, or any combination of that information exclusively to any individual I want, and a different sort to another party at an extremely low cost once the computer systems are developed. So it's kind of a big market for information with relatively small costs once the information delivery is established. And this may be some of the enthusiasm, or a considerable amount of the enthusiasm, of some of the utility companies. Even though some don't yet have the permission, it certainly will be moving in that direction. And I would guess in a short number of years, as California goes and other states go, the rest of the country will go that way. And the rest of the country is because, as the Public Utility Commission in California has stated, this will be really good for new products for that us customers will want and will want to hear from these manufacturers about. Does that handle your question, Josh?
Yeah, it does. And this is obviously a critical issue that has to do with changing the fundamental laws that we have taken for granted in our society. So I thank you for drawing our attention to that.
I'll tell you what I would like to say. At this opportunity, I'm going to indulge and just add these couple of things. There are some environmental organizations that are very supportive of the smart meter because they believe that it will reduce energy usage by individuals. But what we see is in the discussion we just had, it doesn't seem to, for the reasons we've talked about. But what they believe is with the time of use that people will start using more energy in off-peak rather than peak, and it will level out the use, and again, they'll build less energy plants. But so I want to remember, we can have time-of-use meters without having meters called smart meters that are transmitting radiation, which is what some people are worried about. Time-of-use meters can be placed on homes, and meter readers can still go and read them, or people can take pictures of them and send them in, or as various devices. So what I want to make sure is that we don't treat the smart meter as everything. We want to recognize what is it specifically that the smart meter does. The smart meter will be able to show what times you're using your energy, but so would another time-of-use meter that isn't smart at all. And there's one other thing I want to bring up. The information that I said that the smart meters do not demonstrate. There is actually a very simple device called an energy monitor. I've seen them retail for as little as $40 online. And what we do is we hook them up to our electrical wiring, usually at the circuit breaker box, to the positive and negative. And when we turn on the toaster oven and our total kilowatts goes from 15 to 18, we obviously know that the toaster oven uses 3. And then we can turn on the dishwasher and see that it uses 6. And we can actually measure the kilowatts per hour usage of every electrical device in our home. And I suppose if we have a spiral notebook, we can write all those things down, and we can take that sheet of paper, and with a magnet, we can hang it on the refrigerator. And I suppose now that those devices, wholesale, if they're 40 retail, would be about 20. And if we distributed them in the quantities that we're distributing smart meters, millions and millions, I would guess that we could get the cost down to $7 or $8. And so these energy monitors do exactly what people are thinking the smart meters do, but don't. And what we're finding is on pilot programs, like when a utility company is, if you'll notice, they go, we're spending $2.2 million on 3,000 customers. Well, what you might want to do is divide the cost of the whole pilot program by the number of customers, and you'll find that often between $3,000 and $6,000 is the cost per customer. So it means that customers are getting lots and lots of devices for free. And the other thing we're finding is that most of the conservation, if any conservation shows, is not necessarily from the smart meter, but it's from the contests that the utility company is offering to the customers, the one that reduces energy. And people love contests. And even the fact that someone's doing this pilot program for 6 weeks, they're more conscious. So what we're finding out is that a placebo smart meter instead of a smart meter would serve the conservation just as well. And we're also finding that some of the utility companies now, to get better results, are including an energy monitor in the pilot program. And the people on the pilot program are not sophisticated electrical engineers. So when they're the few people that are actually using the detailed information to actually fine-tune their energy usage, they don't realize the information they're getting that they're using is coming from the energy monitor, not from the smart meter. So it's kind of like if I take my car into the mechanic and I go, it's just not working, I want you to put in a new engine. No. Before we put in a new engine, we better find out what the transmission does and the brakes and the engine, and the hydraulics. We better find out exactly which system does what so we don't spend billions and billions of dollars on the wrong thing. And unfortunately, some of the environmental organizations in their enthusiasm are just assuming that these smart meters will do all of these things, and they won't necessarily. But we have to recognize what exactly is it that moves people to conserve energy. And to this point, with the discussion that we've had and what I've brought up, it certainly is not the smart meter. Okay, Josh,
thank you, Glenn. Thanks for that additional information. We just have time for one more question at this stage. Really quick question, if I could ask Duncan, area code 303. I believe that's you. Go ahead.
Yes, my question is very specific. We've heard that the Environmental Defense Fund is one of those agencies or nonprofits, one of those NGOs that actually is believing that the smart meters will help people save energy. Is that correct? Is that part of your information there, Glenn?
I'm not sure. It sounds familiar, but if you understand the information, you go to them and you ask them, if you know the total without knowing all the individual devices and how much any one used, what is the total information during a 15-minute period going to show us? What am I going to cut down? Well, in other words, that's not information doesn't automatically assist. The right information and motivation for people to use it would assist. At this point, the smart meter provides neither of those.
So my question really is, how can that right information be supplied to the customer? You've suggested a couple of ways, but it doesn't have the level of detail for the individual appliances. Is there a way that the customers, aside from this energy monitoring, can get that? And the second part of the question is, why is it necessary for the utilities to have any of this information? It's completely 100% irrelevant to the stated purpose, which is to bill you remotely without having the people go around in trucks and read your meters. That's all they need is your gross usage, and they could also have time of use if they wanted to do tiered pricing. But all this information on your individual appliances completely, totally unnecessary. And so why can't that be screened from them by a gateway in the house controlled by the customer, so that the only information that goes out of the house to them is the bare bones information they need for billing? Because everything else is completely irrelevant to them and actually very much a concern to keep in the privacy of the customer.
Well, I think you've made some statements, but the only question I get is why that information is incredibly valuable to third parties.
No, I know that, but why are they allowed to do this? My point is, why could the case not be made very simply that they just simply need that portion of the data from inside the house that allows them to do billing? The old way is they did aggregate monthly billing. There could be some information, very limited in scope, that would allow them to manage tiered pricing. But 98% of the data that you're talking about that's very valuable to third parties and whatnot is completely not necessary for the utility's purpose of providing bills to you on your energy usage. So how do they get away with actually extracting all of this information? Why is that simply not barred by a law, and why can't that be our approach to this in asking for legislation?
I would agree with you in the statements you made. It's not necessary to deliver your energy. Time of use meters would work fine for that purpose if time of use, and utility companies have been stating pretty generally across the country that all they can see is the total. So I would certainly think that that's inaccurate, and if that information was for the customer, the detail, as I explained, the energy monitors could be provided to each customer. It seems to me in that number is about $10 a piece. They wouldn't transmit anywhere outside of the home, and the problem would be solved that you brought up as far as the laws and what's right and what's reasonable. I can't comment on that.
Okay, but my last question, are the utilities claiming that they're not getting this information? You just said something that confused me. Are they claiming that all they're getting is the gross data, or are they already admitting everything that you've talked about, that they're getting individual signatures and so on?
I have been in a number of meetings with utility company representatives and the statements they have made, and I can't speak for every utility across the country, but often I've heard that they only see the total usage, and they don't see
PG&E doesn't make that claim. PG&E acknowledges that they get all the detailed data you've talked about. Is that correct?
No, not necessarily. I'm not sure now. I'm not sure if they say they get it or they don't look at it, but they've responded that there is absolutely no concern because they cannot tell what's going on in your home. They only can see total information.
So where are you getting the basis of your information? What can we claim as your source?
You've got a document that was submitted to the Colorado Public Utility Company, and if you read the number of pages, you'll see that software has been developed to pull this information out. Okay, I'm going to move on to number 2, and it is called Smart Meter Radiation versus Cell Phone Radiation and Computing Exposure by the Inverse Square. Now I'll get you to the page, and then I'll give you the background. In the PDF file, you'll find a diagram that's called Attachment B1, page 0265. That's in the upper right-hand corner. On the bottom, it says 41. And that's the document I'll be speaking about. But first, let me introduce it. Most people don't understand radiation. Units of radiation, they just don't understand it. I mean, as well as we understand inches and feet and miles, if we use the units of radiation similar, most people wouldn't know the difference. So the thing that would be appropriate is many people are very attached and very comfortable with their cell phones. So it would be a strategy that if we can compare a smart meter to a cell phone, and if we can compare a smart meter to a cell phone where the smart meter is considerably more radiation than the cell phone, then I believe people would be very concerned about it attaching one to their home. If we can compare the smart meter to a cell phone where the smart meter is a tiny fraction of the radiation of a cell phone, then most people generally probably wouldn't be too concerned about attaching one to their home because they're already on a cell phone. So in general, and utility companies, and if there's someone on the call from a utility company, this is for them as well. I'm hoping that utility companies could do a better job, and this has been up in industry that they need to do a better job communicating with their customers. So in general, the utility companies have been making statements something like, you could spend 30 years with a smart meter attached to your home, and that would be like a 10-minute cell phone call. And when someone hears that and they feel like, I'm on a phone for 20 minutes, an hour, 2 hours a day, and I'm not worried about that, and so 10 minutes more in 30 years, I wouldn't worry about it at all. So utility companies have been making statements like that. Now, what we find is the units they use are not always equal. So it's kind of like comparing, if I say I have more money than all of you on the phone, I have 10,000 units of money. Or let's say I have 1,000 units of money, and you guys only have 10 each. And I go, I'm richer than you are. But if we find out that the units I have are pennies, and it ends up I only have $10, and you people all have 10 $100 bills, well, then you do have more money than I do, and the comparison was not relevant because my units were different. So what I'm going to do is there's always scientists and even universities. You know, I work at a university and I have a lot of colleagues, and we can be influenced what research we do by funding, and so can industry. Industry can hire scientists and motivate them and push them in the direction to get research results that would be beneficial to them. But what I've chosen is I've taken, to my knowledge, the only public health department in the United States that has actually done a smart meter health report, and they did it actually investigating the current available science rather than simply going to the industry that's most familiar with it, which is something we often do. You know, if you want to know how to build dams, you go to the industry that builds dams. You know, if you want to go to something like that. So, but in this case, because the industry has a vested interest, we have to, you know, rationally and scientifically question their motivation and question the science. So what I did is I picked the public health department. It's the Santa Cruz County, State of California Public Health Department on smart meter health. And again, this is one page from that report, and you can get the entire report on Josh's website. And what this does is it compares the radiation from a smart meter to that of a cell phone. And what it does is it uses equivalent units. And so if we look at the diagram, and I hope everyone's looking at the diagram, because without it, it'll be incredibly difficult. But if we see, it looks like a high-rise building on this chart. It's a bar graph. And we see that a smart meter at 3 feet away is 40 units of radiation. And since we're comparing smart meter to cell phone, we don't need units. Whether it's inches or centimeters or miles or whatever, the comparison is identical. So if we find the cell phone, which is the first one on the left, we see that it has 0.75 units of radiation compared to 40 for a smart meter. And this would be a cell phone held at the ear compared to a smart meter 3 feet away. So if we wanted to figure out what's the relative radiation of the two, we'd have to compare 40 to 0.75. And anyone that has a calculator can, I'm going to answer this for you since you can't respond on the mute, but if you divided 40 by 0.75, you'll get the result of 53 1/3. So what the Santa Cruz County, State of California Health Department delivers to the public at the request of the Board of Supervisors so that they can make decisions, you know, on smart meters in their jurisdiction. And they've heard many reports about health. They asked them to do this original report. It says that at 3 feet from the smart meter, it's 53 1/3 times greater than a cell phone held at the ear. Now let's think about this a second. And I would even propose that if I were to take a point at the ear, and let me make it extreme so I can get people to visualize. If I take a pinpoint, not the head of the pin, but the actual point of the pin, a point at the ear, I would think that, wow, the radiation from the cell phone, I would think, could be greater than that from a smart meter 3 feet away. And I may be right, but think of this. A cell phone held at the ear on a pinpoint at the ear, how much radiation do you think that would be on the heel, on your heel, on your big toe, on your knee, on your elbow? Whereas a smart meter from 3 feet away, there might be thousands and thousands of equivalent pinpoints on my body, maybe even millions, where I'm getting radiation. So now what I'm sort of moving to is, what are we concerned about? Radiation at a point, at a tiny portion of our body, or radiation across our entire body? And what this report from the Santa Cruz County Health Department shows is that if we use equivalent units, and the units we use, and I would write these 4 words down, it's full body radiation exposure. And why would we use those equivalent units? Like, why do we use miles instead of inches? Well, I would believe if people are concerned about health, I would think that radiation across the whole body is probably the most relevant unit, rather than a radiation only on a point at the ear, only on a point at the heel. So what they've determined is when we use these equivalent units for both devices, we get a comparison of 53 1/3 times greater radiation from the smart meter than the cell phone. Okay, now I'm going to bring up a point. Which is worse? And I'll answer these rhetorical questions for you. Which is worse, a 3rd-degree burn or a 2nd-degree burn? And if you're familiar with fire and things like that, a 3rd-degree burn is much worse. So if I told you one person had a 3rd-degree burn and someone else only had 2nd-degree burns, you'd probably be more concerned about the person with the 3rd-degree burn. But if I tell you the 3rd-degree burn was only on a pinpoint size of the tip of the finger, which certainly isn't a health concern, it might sting a bit, compared to 2nd-degree burns over the entire body, which could be extremely a serious health problem, even life-threatening, then I see, so we've got to make this, and that's why the Santa Cruz County Health Department is using full-body radiation exposure. And it's very important that we're talking about consistent information. And if you'll notice, this information comes from Hirsch. Hirsch did a variety of assumptions and workups, but what's important is, any one scientist can say this, 100 scientists can say a variety of things. What's important is the health department is not a university professor getting funding from a source. The health department is not an industry that has a vested interest, but the health department, to my knowledge, is the only unbiased, in favor of the public organization, qualified organization that's delivering information on smart meter health. And this is the information they chose to present to the public. So now we're going to do one more thing. You don't stand 3 feet from a smart meter. Sometimes you actually, if it's mounted on a wall of a bedroom, and you're going to spend hours and hours. If it's mounted on the wall of a kitchen, of a dining room, you're going to spend hours near the meter. But regardless, sometimes you'll be further away, sometimes you'll be closer. So I'm going to take the scenario that it could be that people are spending time in the room where the smart meter is attached on the outside wall. And could we be 3 feet? Sure, we could be moving around the room, and probably the side of the room the meter's mounted on could be 3 feet. Could we even be closer? Sure, well, if our bed is up against the wall, in California, by the way, we only have 4-inch walls. Some of you might have thicker walls, but with 4-inch walls, we can have a bed up against the wall. We can have a couch up against the wall, a chair, a desk that we lean forward on, which happens to be, unfortunately, the way I usually sit. So, as an example, I'm going to demonstrate to you how to calculate the radiation at different distances from the source. So I'm going to pick 1 foot, because we could be 1 foot. And even though not all people will be 1 foot at all times, when with millions and millions of meters attached to people's homes, smaller numbers of millions and certainly hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people could be affected. So let's take a look at this. We compute this by a thing called an inverse square. And in order, the inverse is simple. One thing goes up, one goes down. So as the number of feet to the smart meter or to any radiation source gets smaller, obviously the amount of radiation gets larger. And so what we do is, and that way I don't have to use the minus sign, which is an inverse in the actual calculation of the number. So if I'm going to go from 3 feet to 1 foot, and that's going to get me 1/3 of the distance. So in order not to use fractions, because anyway, you can all, some of you can and some of you may be uncomfortable, but you can all go the other way. So I'm going to go the opposite way, from 1 foot to 3 feet. And 3 feet, don't use any math, any arithmetic, no adding or subtracting. It's all multiplication. When we go from 1 foot to 3 feet, that's 3 times as far away. So some people would think that at 1 foot, it's 3 times the radiation it would be at 3 feet. And that would be true if the relationship was linear. But it's not linear. It's called the inverse square. And for some of you, it's simple. From others of you, you're going to have to remember back a number of years. But we're going to take that 3 times and square it. And 3 times 3 is 9. So at 1 foot, the radiation is 9 times what the radiation would be at 3 feet. And so what I'd like you all to do is, you don't have the space on your paper to draw it to scale, but I'd like you to put one more listing on that graph out to the right at the end of the axis that says smart meter at 1 foot, and I could do the multiplication for you. It would be 9 times 40. It would be 360 units of radiation. I'm assuming you've all got that. You know, it's simply 9 times 40 is 360. And now, that's a comparison to the different distances. Now I'm going to compare the radiation at 1 foot to a smart meter compared to a cell phone held at the ear. So now I'm going to compare 360 to 0.75. And if anyone has a calculator and you divide 360 by 0.75, I'm pretty sure that you're going to come up with 480. And what that tells us then is that a smart meter at 1 foot is 480 times the radiation of a cell phone held at the ear when considering full body exposure radiation. And again, that's not just a unit that I picked. It's a unit that seems to be most relevant. It's the units that the Public Health Department picked, and I've talked to another number of other scientists and biologists and medical doctors that similarly feel that sure, that's the only relevant unit. Otherwise, it has some limitation. Okay, just to do the math and to show you people, you go, well, what would it be at 30 feet, or what would it be at 6 feet? Somebody asked me, what if my head's up against the wall when I'm sleeping and the meter's right outside? Well, you could take I suppose you could take, in California, 4 inches, 12 inch versus the 1 foot, 12 inches, and one is 3 times the other. Square it again, 9 times 360, do the comparison, and you find out it's over 4,000 times the radiation of a cell phone. But that's getting pretty extreme, and it would be rare. There could be people, a baby could be in a crib with his head leaned up right up against the vertical bars up against the wall, and he might be 4.5 inches away. But for most people, that's pretty extreme. But anyway, let's look at something else so that you can, on your own, calculate the radiation at any distance. Let's take 10 feet. And now let's compare 3 feet, which we have on the graph already, and compare it to 10 feet. Well, how many times greater is 10 than 3? And I'm going to give you the number. It's a little more than 3. And if we square a little more than 3, on an actual calculator, we're going to get about 11. But I'm going to round it off for simplicity, because we're not going for precision here. We're going for relationships. I'm going to round it off to 10 so that we can do the math simply. So in other words, we're saying at the closer distance, we have 10 times the radiation, 3 feet, as we do at 10 feet. So at 10 feet, obviously, we'd have 1/10. And if you look at the diagram, it's got 40 units of radiation at 3 feet. What is 1/10 of 40? It's 4. And if you look in the diagram, sure enough, it says smart meter 10 feet always on, 4 units of radiation. So now that you see how how the Public Health Department calculated these numbers, and we did another example at 1 foot, now you should be able to numerically calculate radiation at any distance you choose, and then compare it to 0.75 for the comparison smart meter radiation to cell phone radiation. And of course, there are other issues. I don't want to get into them too much because I assume I'm talking to you people as though you are incredibly well informed. This isn't a beginner's talk. You people are incredibly well informed on the issues. I'm simply bringing you some foundation documents and explaining them, interpreting them, so that you can use it. You can check the information, and then you can use the information to correct anyone that is using different units. You can talk to your utility company and possibly get them to communicate better to your communities. And some of them, I would suspect, would very sincerely appreciate this information. Okay, so number 3 is a page, and this is very important, the source of this document. This is a document that took the people in California well over a year to get from the utility company. And it was finally, pressing the Public Utility Commission over and over again with dozens and dozens of scientists and politicians, representatives. A judge finally ordered PG&E to submit this document. So that's why this document is so critical, because this comes actually from the utility company, and it wasn't something they wanted to submit. It was something they were forced to submit by a judge. So the document is, again, in the PDF file. On the very top it says question 2, but what we're looking for is in the top 1/3 of the page, it's table 2-1. Okay, and I'm going to go through this casually. And we have 3 columns in this table. It says, 3 vertical columns. And the first one, on the very left-hand column, it says meter read data. And then if you look at the titles of the second 2 columns, it says transmission frequency per 24-hour period. The first one says average. The second one says transmission frequency per 24-hour maximum, or at least the 99.9 percentile. That's not the absolute maximum. That's just a higher number than many, but not the very highest. So anyway, what we see here is meter read data. And this is simply the number of times that each meter transmits data from the home of the home's energy usage. And surprisingly, I would guess that this would surprise many of you. It says it only does it, whether it be the average meter or even the meters that transmit quite a bit more, it only actually sends the utility information from your home 6 times per day. And if in a 24-hour period, that would be, if you space those 6 times evenly, that would be once every 4 hours. So I'm going to do a little sidestep here. If anyone has ever heard, this way they have real-time data. These meters are real-time. No, wait a minute. We've got the information right from PG&E submitted to the judge that shows that it's not real-time. Once every 4 hours is not real-time. Now, of course, they delay that even further for the customer because they have to get it up on the website, and of course it's not the raw information, it's the information we spoke about in 1.1. But this document alone shows that if someone says, oh, no, it's real-time data, and you can see that it's not. 6 times in 24 hours is hardly real-time. Okay, but anyway, and the thing that's also interesting is, okay, let's just go on. It says network management. Well, these are kind of the jobs or the tasks that they perform to maintain their network, to make sure the network is working. And this number, again, is a relatively small number, 15 in the average, 30 in some of the meters. And then time sync. I would think that time sync has something to do with keeping the clocks together, making sure all the clocks on all the meters and all the collectors or whatever the lady mentioned, the routers. Everything, the clocks better be the same. And if we look at that, it's got 360 on the average and on the meters that transmit more often. Okay, and by the way, the actual definitions, well, I won't tell you yet. I don't want to distract you. The last one is mesh network message management. And what some people call this is chatter between the meters. What other people call this is the mesh network. What this is the radiation transmissions from meter to meter to meter to meter to meter in the communities. And if you'll notice, even though the meter only sends your home utility information 6 times a day, it shows here that it transmits radiation 9,600 additional times simply to keep the chatter amongst the meters going, whether it be information or just keeping the meters awake and on, active at all times, so that when anything's ever going to be sent that matters, the system is ready. So now let's be fair to the utility company. When the utility company says they only transmit information a few times or 6 times a day, they're actually telling the exact truth. But if you were a person that was asking that question because you were concerned about the amount of radiation, then saying they only transmit data every six times a day, implying they only radiate 6 times a day, would then certainly be misleading, because we can see that the numbers, even in the average column, add up to, nearly 10,000 times a day. So if you really wanted to know how many times they transmit information from your home as far as being concerned about real time, it's only 6 times a day. But if you're concerned about radiation, then that 6 is irrelevant, the 15 is irrelevant, the 360 is almost irrelevant, but the total, including the 9,600, is relevant. And I'd ask all of you to put that total under that column and put it as 9,981. And just put it there so you have the number, because I'm going to reference that number. And I'm sometimes going to call that the 10,000 column. But it's 9,981. So now we might be a little bit concerned. Now there's another thing we're going to do. Sometimes, in fact, this is getting into the question now of the person asked me about how often they transmit. It also has in this column, it says they transmit for 45.3 seconds. And there's the answer to that question. So now if the utility company says the meters only transmit for 45.3 seconds, well, if that's correct, that's how long they're transmitting. But if they represent that to mean for a period of only 45 seconds, from this point, 45 seconds later, it shuts off, and for the rest of the day, it's off, for the rest of the 24 hours, it's off. That is not accurate, absolutely not accurate. It's not for a period continuously of 45 seconds. And let's look and see what it actually is. We have 9,981 total transmissions, and those transmissions take a total of 45.3 seconds. So if we divide, and you might want to put this down, it's just going to be divide 45.3 seconds by 9,981. That's going to give us the time, the length of time of every individual transmission. And if you're using a calculator, I believe you're going to get 0.0045. And what that means is 4 1/2 thousandths of a second. And so now what we see is, the transmissions are very brief. They're just bullets. They're just spikes. But there's about 10,000 of them. So the utility company, and I would guess, I'm a consultant for industry as well. I do this, and if I wanted to represent for the utility company that they're not transmitting too often to make people not too concerned, I would just say, hey, just go ahead and add up the 4 1/2 thousandths for each of the 10,000 transmissions, call it 45 seconds, and who's going to care about 45 seconds? But let's give a visualization of this. Let's take a strobe light. And if when you're eating, when you first wake up, when you're at the computer, when you're watching TV, when you are what else do you do in your house? When you're talking to your children, when you're writing letters, just before you go to sleep, while you're sleeping, if you have a strobe light going off, and it only lasts for 4 1/2 thousandths of a second each time, but it's going off 10,000 times a day, and which is, if you do the math, it comes out to about every 8 1/2 seconds. A normal person, normal rational person would kind of go crazy and say, I can't stand this. It's constant. It's for 24 hours. It's been going off steady, and I can't take it anymore. But another way to represent it would be for the utility company to say, no, Glenn, it hasn't. It's not going on 24 hours. It's only transmitting for 45.3 seconds. So it's a difference of a point of view, essentially. It's a different way to represent the numbers. Okay, I'm going to come back to this with some other examples, but first off, I want to go to the third column, which is the maximum 99.9th percentile. And if you're dealing with 99th percentile, you're talking about 1 in 100. And I think most of you would know that. If you're 1 in 100, you're the 99th percentile. But 99.9th percentile would reflect 1 in 1,000. So what they're showing us here is 1 in 1,000 meters transmits not about 10,000 times on average, but we'd have to add those four numbers, 6 plus 30 plus 360 plus 190,000 times. And if we add those numbers up, I'm just going to eliminate the first three because I'm trying to round here, but I'm just going to call that, and please write that, the 190,000 column. So I'm going to call that column 190,000 radiation transmissions per day. And this is another number I'd like you to write, which you can come up with on your own as well, but in a day there are 86,400 seconds. And you can get that by multiplying, 60 times 24 possible, or I might have said it wrong, but you can get that. So if you realize there's about 86,000 seconds in a day, and this meter is transmitting 190,000 times per day, that's more than twice every second. And you go, well, it's only 1 in 1,000. That's really rare. Well, let me use California as an example. In Northern California, there's about 10 million smart meters, or that's what they're proposing to deploy. And just roughly, how many people do you think live at every smart meter? This isn't even California, just Northern. I would say let's do 2 to make the arithmetic simple. So if we say 2 people are living at every smart meter, essentially, we've got 10 million meters, 20 million people living in proximity to a smart meter. So of 20 million, the 99.9th percentile, 1,000th of that is, take off 3 zeros off 20 million, and we've got 20,000 people. So 20,000 people have a smart meter that's transmitting more than twice a second, 190,000 times a day. And of course I'm rounding off numbers. If any of you get better information, more precise information, use it. But I feel in communication, rounding is the best way to go. Okay. And by the way, that's the 99.9 percentile. PG&E did not give us the full number of meters that have 180,000, that have 160,000. In fact, some meters have more than 190,000. The 99.91 percentile, the 99.92th percentile, and the 99.93rd percentile, they have even more than 190,000. And but I can only guess the distribution because they haven't given it to us. But there's meters that transmit 170,000 and 140,000, and even more than do, I'm assuming, than 190,000. Okay, so until we get the exact distribution, we can only assume averages. But it's not just those meters transmitting 190,000. There are certainly meters between the 10 and 190 that are transmitting somewhere in between that. So there's a lot of people getting a lot of exposure to meters over 10,000 per day. Okay, I guess at this point I would say, are there any questions? But since you can't talk, and I don't want to take questions yet, I'm just saying now what we're going to do is we're going to note something, and this is a bit alarming to me. And but anyway, what we notice, if you look back in the average table, we see 45.3 seconds. And we see a footnote. It says number 4. So let's go to the bottom of the page and find footnote number 4, and I'm going to read this to you with some emphasis here. It says, as stated in response 1, a small number of electric smart meters communicate somewhat longer than 45 seconds per day, which resulted in an overall mean duration of approximately 62 seconds. So that's really alarming to me because when someone talks about average, they're usually talking about the mean average. The mean is the simple average. It's if you add up all the student scores in the class and you divide by the number of students, That's the average. It's called the mean average. Now, there's another very specialized average that's very rarely used and has absolutely no application or relevance here, but it was used. And it's called the median. And the median is simply a number that there's as many below as there are above. So I'm going to give you an example. If we take 10 students and their score is 1 each, and we take 10 other students and their score is 3 each, the median, the number that there's as many below as above, is 2. And in this case, the mean, which is the normal average that people think of, is also 2, because if we add the 10 ones, we get 10. If we add the 10 threes, we get 30. Adding 30 and 10 is 40. Dividing that total by the 20 students, we get 2. So the median and the mean are the same. But what's happened here is, let's look at this example now. If we keep those 10 students getting 1, and we have only 1 student getting 3, and the other 9 students having a score of 1 million each, now, to get the average, we've got to add those 9 millions, which is 9 million. I'm going to eliminate the 1s and 3 because it's negligible now. I'm going to change the 9 million to 10 million to make the arithmetic simple. And when we divide the 10 million by 20, we get the average student score is 500,000. We see that those 9 millions really brought up the average considerably. But I'm going to ask a question, and I'm going to pause so some of you can think about it. What is the median in this example? The 10 ones, the 1 3, and the 9 millions. What is the median? Well, the median is still 2 because there's 10 scores above it and 10 scores, there's 10 scores below it and 10 scores above it. So in other words, no matter how big the numbers get above it, it doesn't change the average when you use a very specialized average called the median. So in this chart, going back to table 2.1, what they've done is they've used a median average, which is totally inappropriate for the question that we asked in California. And they did it, and what it does is it lowers it shows us the median, which is not what we asked for. But anyway, we can compute the real average by doing this. If you'll notice, it says in the footnote, it raises it to 62 seconds. Well, in a footnote, who would even notice or care about an extra from 45 to 62 seconds? It's only 17 seconds. Who cares? But wait a minute. 17 compared to 45 is almost 40%. So to have 40% more time, we have to have 40% more radiation transmissions. And now to add the 40% more, I'm going to give you the exact formula, and I'd like you to all write this down. I'm going to give you 2 fractions. The numerator is the top of one, the denominator is the bottom, and then the other one it'll be equal to another fraction. And here it is. To compute the actual number of radiation transmissions coming out of the meter, the average, the true average, the mean, it's 45.3 over 62 equals 9,981 over x. And to solve for x, I'm going to give you the answer, but you simply multiply the one denominator times the other fraction's numerator and you crisscross them. The answer is x equals 13,661. And that is now the average number of transmissions coming out. I now call that 14,000 because, again, I like to round off to the nearest thousand. And you'll notice with the 190,000, I round it down. With the 13,661 rounds to 14,000. So we now see that if you compare the 14,000 radiation transmissions per day to the 86,000 seconds, the average meter transmits, on average, once every 6 seconds, and that's considerable. And now I'm going to give you some examples. If somebody sticks you with a pin and the pin stick is just 4/1000 of a second, but they do it 14,000 times, you're going to say they stuck you continuously for 24 hours. The utility company will say no, only 45 seconds. If somebody shoots bullets at you for 24 hours, 14,000 bullets at you for every 6 seconds on average, and you say it was an incredible experience, terrible, the utility company will say, no, no, no. If you count the time the hammer on the gun hit the firing portion of the bullet, that event was only 4.5 thousandths of a second. They will say, you were only shot at for 45 seconds. You can, any example you like, you can take rain, you can take walking across a forest that has no cover, and you had planned 2 days across in perfect weather, but once you started, there was no cover whatsoever, just an open plain, and it poured on you for 24 hours, and you had no coat, you had no hat, and it was an incredible event, and you said, I was poured on for 24 hours. The utility company would say, no, Glenn, you weren't. The time that each drop hit your skin was only 4.5 thousandths of a second. And if you add up every drop that hit you over that 24 hours, you were only rained on for 45 seconds. So you can think of many, many examples to represent the event, but most normal, rational people would say that's continuous. And that upsets me personally because this was information that the people in California requested and was ordered by a judge, and this is, appears to be intentionally misleading. But now what's fortunate is you people see how it was done. You have the true number. I would say you can very comfortably use 14,000 once every 6 seconds. And if someone makes a statement that it's only a few seconds a day, you can, with this document, deny any false statement, since I don't know of any other document across the country that has a utility company submitting it to a judge. That's something that they're held to at that level. Okay, any questions? I'll open it up to questions.
Yeah, Glenn, thank you so much for that. This is really, really important stuff that we actually understand what's going on here with these numbers. And thank you so much for that easy-to-follow explanation. So if you have a question about that, just hit 5-star.
One thing, Josh. We're a couple few minutes from the original time, and I want people to know that 4 through 8 are really, really quick if anyone chooses to continue. But because I'm not getting feedback, I'm kind of making sure that everybody gets this. And this is the most important part. But if people want to stay on, I would, in a short period of time, we can race through 4 through 8 because we've already covered the foundation material now that I wanted to give to you.
Absolutely. Thank you for pointing that out. Yeah, we'll be, what would you say, another 20 minutes to get through 4 and 8?
About. It might be as much, something like that. Depends on if questions come right now or we hold them.
Okay. I just have one question. Do these numbers, these 14,000 and 190,000 and so forth, does that even include the home area network, which is the Zigbee chip is going to be radiating upon?
Thanks for that question. No, it does not. And by the way, the home area network is a system where they'll have a transmitter on every device, and they say, and then you'll be able to know everything. And it's funny. Well, why? If the smart meters as they're being publicized, that they help us to conserve energy, then it's inconsistent that we would need the home area network to do the same thing. So there's another layer of demonstration of inconsistency. But no, the home area network is not included. And one other thing that isn't included, Josh, is these are the transmissions from each meter. These numbers of transmissions do not include the radiation transmissions that run through a person's home from other meters in their community, from other meters in the community, rushing to reach their own meter or just rushing through their home and missing the meter. So, and that number, I don't know the logistics of it. That's going to change depending on every mesh network, every community, the number of meters, the number of collectors. That's going to vary. But the number of transmissions once every 6 seconds, I'll be very clear, does not include radiation transmitted into and through the home from meters other than the one on your own home. And
one piece of information I'll give everybody in the call, if you want to write this down, is that we work with an independent researcher, home environment consultant, and we had a testing device to measure the peak radiation of these pulses, 190,000 microwatts per meter squared was the peak radiation for one of these pulses. That's with about 14 meters, which is not uncommon in a apartment building complex. It's around just under 100,000 microwatts per meter squared for one smart meter on average tested. And to put it in perspective, the building biology code from Germany's Baubiology, the building biology guidelines, for extreme concern, the threshold is 1,000 microwatts per meter squared. So this is very significant from an independently funded scientific perspective based upon published literature. So thank you, Glenn, for that. And we'll go to area code 250.
Hello. Yes, I have a question. Have you ever, Glenn, personally met with laboratory scientists?
Absolutely. I personally have. I've had the opportunity. I'm a university professor. I do a lot of statistics, not just for statistics' sake, but for the other areas that I teach and consult in. So I would be afraid to Google something and distribute information, but I have met personally with the laboratory scientists that test the non-ionizing radiation, and their observations in much more complicated and technical terms, but me simplifying, is human cell damage and DNA chain breaks in vitro, they call it. It's in test tubes because they're not allowed to test people, incredibly. And third is in laboratory rats, they see breaches in the blood-brain barrier, and that's essentially holes or something. And I guess the brain is a special organ, and it can't handle some of the chemicals and the toxins that the body handles well and the blood carries. So there's a barrier for the brain, and they see this. And those particular laboratory scientists, the ones that I met with, are highest integrity, highest capability, and they personally don't allow their children or grandchildren to live in a home with a smart meter. And they also restrict cell phone use to, rare, occasional emergency, and particularly for their youngest children, youngest grandchildren, just, being reasonable. But as far as a smart meter on the home, absolutely forbid it for their families as their judgment. Though, again, that's just, that's a judgment call, and that's my personal experience. But again, the documents I'm bringing to you are ones that I believe you can carry forward. And when you're done, by the way, again, if I've told you that 4 plus 3 is 7, it's not because Professor Chase told you. You can confirm that on your own and carry this information forward. You have the documents, you have the substantiation, and I believe you can communicate with anyone, an electrical engineer, anyone that makes statements. Bring these documents to bear and bring these documents to bear. I would suspect that all honest people would be very pleased to understand this interpretation, because many people simply pass information forward that they've been told, and they have no sense of what it really means. Let me go on so we can get this for the people so they can have some applications of this data. We're going to number 4, typical newspaper article comments. So I'm sure some of you have seen these, and we go down to number 4. It says some typical bogus comments by utility companies in the media. And by the way, I've met some people in utility companies that are good and legitimate, and I don't mean to knock them, but there is a lot of misinformation. Anyway, it says consumers can actually reduce energy consumption when they have the feedback on usage available on the utility company website. We've already covered that. It doesn't seem that we can. It's certainly not happening where they've been installed. Customers can purchase home monitoring devices that will help homeowners evaluate consumption by appliances and determine ways to save. This is the HON network. We wouldn't need the HON network if the smart meters were doing the job that they're advertised to do. There are no truths to complaints. The smart meters can be used to spy on consumers. With the documents submitted to the Colorado PUC and with the software available, you make your own statement on that if it can't be used. Also, there's security experts. The head of national security, the previous one, has made statements that it's, this grid is insane. It will be absolutely impossible to stop security breaches. The radiation frequency emitted by the smart meters, for example, is so much less than emitted by a cell phone. That's not what is delivered to the public by a public health department, as we've spoken about. Smart meters are a technology that's been proven. They're very new to me. That's not a statement that I would say proven. Usually things take quite a few decades to prove. And then here's one I really like. There is, quote, no proof of any health effects from smart meters. I want to clarify this. And I could say that could be a true statement. If I insist that proof is 100% certainty, then to my knowledge, nothing on this earth can be proven. In other words, if I can't prove that my children will be hurt if I let them go play ball on a busy street. I can't prove that a person will be harmed or killed if they jump off a 10-story building. But in other words, so what we're dealing with here is a statement that's very deceptive because someone said, what about gravity? Well, I guess gravity is a law, and that's about as close as an example as I can think. But in this uncertain world and on this earth that we really don't understand everything, if we're requiring 100% proof, then essentially nothing can be proven. And in this world, in reality, and what the government generally protects us from is not things that are 100% proven, but from things that have evidence and overwhelming evidence. In the United States, we convict people of crimes, of serious crimes, not based on proof, based on evidence. And we call it overwhelming evidence. We call it beyond a reasonable doubt. And we even execute people in this country, not on proof, but based on evidence. So we've got quite a bit of evidence. We've got, I've read about close to 1,000 reports, peer-reviewed reports, credible reports, showing different aspects of the non-ionizing radiation affecting this, affecting that. And the thing that stands out is at levels considerably lower, tremendously lower than emitted by smart meters. And the other negative thing is the accumulation, and nothing accumulates like something every 6 seconds. That's constant. There's no relief from it. So anyway, I don't want to go too far. If we take race car drivers, 25 of them over 50 years that crashed into a brick wall on a specific turn at a racetrack, and each of them crashed at 300 miles approximately, and the crashes were so bad, the cars burned. Everything's destroyed, no autopsy possible. I could say, you can't prove, there's no proof that the drivers died from the collision with the brick wall. There's no proof, because what's possible, some of them might have died from a heart attack, some of them might have died from a stroke, some of them might have died from an infection, from dietary problems. I know some of you are laughing like, well, that's ridiculous. All 25 of them? Well, of course they didn't, but you can't prove that the collision killed them. So you can always say there's no proof. And that's an important point. But proof isn't what's relevant. We don't do many things. There's no proof that cigarettes cause cancer. I've got an uncle that smoked 5 packs a day, lived till 97, never affected him, it appeared. That doesn't mean that they don't inform us and they don't keep asbestos in walls now. They don't allow DDT anymore. There's no proof. I think we certainly have sufficient evidence, and that's what reasonable public policy decisions are based on. Summary points of the Santa Cruz County Health Report. Someone else did this. This is a really good number of statements, and I want to bring to your attention that these statements are not exact quotes. Some of them are, but some of them actually do computations and then in parentheses say this was computed, just like that example. Back in the room with the smart meter installed, I would now say at various distances in the home, in the room where the smart meter is installed, it is likely that you will be getting 50 to 450 times the radiation. Actually, it's 53 1/3 to 480. But I'll round it off to 50 to 450 times the radiation of a cell phone at various distances in that room. And it's just an approximation, but when you realize the magnitude that it can be, and I think that at minimum, the people that are installing these need to give a warning that distances close to this meter are unacceptable, just like cell phones give little warnings in the tiny print not to hold the cell phone against your head, but to keep it some centimeters away. But at least the information, like the government doesn't stop smoking for other than over 18 or for under 18, but they certainly are warning and warning and warning us. And even cigarettes are obviously not mandatory. With a product that's mandatory, the warnings and the precautions have to be so much greater because the technology is beyond what the typical normal person is expected to know or understand. And in these kind of cases, public policy typically protects the individuals, and this is a very strange situation in my opinion. Anyway, that's number 5. There's some great statements in there, and I just brought to your attention, though, be careful, because they're not all exact quotes, but there's certainly the information from that report. Now I'm going to number 6. Some communities are getting opt-out, and I just want to bring an accounting issue to your attention, and I'll use California as an example. On average, or approximately, each Northern California customer of PG&E is paying about $300 for the smart meter and the smart meter program. So when the utility company says, well, if you get an opt-out and you get this other program, you're going to have to pay for it, the only accounting portion they've forgotten about is, well, what about the smart meter I already paid for and the program costs I already paid for that I'm not even participating in and I'm not getting one? Why would I, in other words, I can sort of understand the argument that you only pay for the program you're in, but why would a person that's not going to get the new program, why would they pay for 2 programs and not get a credit? And that accounting seems to have been missed in the consideration. And some of the utility companies say it's not fair for the customers to pay for the opt-out. Well, that's for the second program, and their costs in some cases would be 6 cents, 8 cents spread over all the people. But why would it then be fair for the opt-out customers to pay for the smart meter program? And, of course, I'm not going to go into it, but when you say opt-out, obviously there's some federal documents that show that these meters were supposed to be offered to us, not forced on us, and giving us a chance to opt out at a fee. Offering something and forcing something is enforcing to pay to not be forced is quite a difference from offering. But that's something you people probably know quite well. So that's 6. Number 7 says no proof of health effects. I think we covered that already with the example of no proof versus evidence and overwhelming evidence. And the last one is average versus peak. And I like this one because we still can't get the peak output from our utility company. We've been demanding it for a couple years at least, and we can't get it. And the reason, well, I'll give you an example. And I'm going to change, remember we're dealing with, in this chart, transmissions that are 4.5 thousandths of a second long. To simplify this example, I'm going to talk about transmissions that are 1/1000th of a second long because it's so much easier to visualize and compute because there's 1,000 of them now in a whole second. There's 1,000 1/1000ths. So if we have a bomb, and if this bomb is big enough to explode and obliterate half of the village or community we live in, that's an incredible impact bomb. But if the bomb only explodes, the detonation time is only 1/1000th of a second. Well, if that happens every 6 seconds, I'm going to ask the question, how many thousandths of a second are there in 6 whole seconds? And the answer is, well, there's 1,000 in every second. In 6 seconds, there's 6,000 of them. And of those 6,000 events, which are each 1,000th of a second long, only one of them has this incredible impact, which blows up half our village or half our community. So if we average that one event in 1,000th of a second with 5,999 other events that all are zeros, 0, 0, 0, 5,999, with the one big explosion, the big detonation that's huge. But when we average it with the other 5,999, I'm going to give you a visualization rather than a numerical answer. You can imagine, or you can hardly imagine, the impact of the bomb blowing up half your village. But if you take the average with those other 5,999 zeros, which is the time between, put your lips together, or imagine your partner's lips being put together, and with the slightest effort, blowing on your cheek from 4 or 5 inches, something you can hardly feel. Well, that's the average impact versus the peak, which is my visualization for you of the bomb impact. And again, they call that only 1,000th of a second because they only count. Anyway, that concludes it, and now I'm willing to take questions across all of these topics, if you choose to.
Let's go to area code 573.
Hi, I was just wondering, back on table 2.1, how did you determine they were using the median rather than the mean?
Okay, good question. I'm moving to the table. I've got the table in front of me. In other words, because in the footnote, it says that a small number, which is not defined, but just a number of meters, some communicate more than the 45 seconds, and a sufficient number of them communicate more to bring the mean up to 62 seconds. Well, the mean is the average we're used to. So the only other way the only other average that it can be is the median. Because it can't be the average they have in the chart cannot be the mean, because then it would be incorrect. The true mean is 62 seconds. So the only one that it can be is the median. Does that answer your question?
In the footnote, so they're saying in the footnote, when they refer to overall mean, that's the true mean, and that what they're calling average above, which you would initially think is the mean, is not really the mean.
It has to be the median, or it could. I mean, assuming it's even correct. In other words,
right.
Let's assume that this information they gave to the judge is correct. Right. It's certainly at this or more, but the only other average there is that could reconcile the footnote is that it's the median. And again, this bothers me because some of the information is misunderstood and communicated forward by customer representatives, by different people at the utility companies in totally good faith. They're just delivering scripts and information they've been told. But this is a document submitted to a judge that appears to be, and I would back off if they could explain it otherwise, but it appears to be an intentional deception to minimize the radiation that they were forced to deliver to the public via the judge. And what the deception they used has a number that shows radiation transmissions every 8.5 seconds, with the count they gave. And 8.5 seconds, I think all of us on the phone would think, well, you'd be waiting around for 8.5 seconds, a few seconds anyway. But when we find out it's every 6 seconds, there's no waiting around. That's really constant. And I would say that was a strategic choice to keep that number off the table, out of the table.
Typically the word average would refer to mean. So to use
typically would,
average.
But I would also think that using median in the table as the average and then in a footnote, which few people read, and I suspect even possibly the judge missed it, this way they're not committing possibly, what would it be, fraud or contempt of court.
Yeah,
but again, I say if the utility company could come forward with a different explanation, I would be glad to hear it. But this is as it stands.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Okay, some people are asking, what do we do and things like that. I would look at 3 specific points now. Let me pull them up just a second. Okay, the World Health Organization has placed the non-ionizing radiation from smart meters on their Class 2B possible carcinogen list. Now, that's what they did. Now, there are some people saying, they didn't put that not from smart meters. This was from cell phones or from walkie-talkies, from emergency vehicles. No. If you there's documentation, and the actual correct it's not an interpretation. The correct information is that, yes, the non-ionizing radiation from smart meters is on the Class 2B carcinogen list. So that's one piece of information. With this piece of information that I just gave you, now we have this radiation is not just a few seconds a day. It's what a normal, rational person would call constant, and it's continuous, and obviously it's accumulating in the human body. So with that, with the World Health Organization classification, and with the visual perspective of comparing the radiation from the smart meter to a device that we're more familiar with, a cell phone, those three documents together would seem that a rational, realistic governmental body would say, we can't force these onto people's homes. You know, some people allow their kids even 20 minutes in the sun. Other people let their kid out 8 hours in the sun. Some people let their kid, allowed to eat a little bit of sucrose. Other parents only allow none at all. When they deploy these meters on homes without choices, they're taking the parents' ability to protect their children in the manner that they would choose to in their own home. So for someone to say it's very little radiation, it's a certain amount of radiation that's recognized as a possible carcinogen. So that would be extremely difficult to support why someone should be allowed to force these onto a parent's home that has the responsibility of protecting their children. And these are just 3 documents, but key ones. And then, of course, there are hundreds and thousands of well-qualified, peer-reviewed articles and reports, and even governmental bodies that are recognizing the problem. And remember, governments don't move as fast as we'd like in the right direction all the time. You know, I would say, what was it? Cigarettes took a whole century, essentially, until they really warned people about them. So if we're willing to take the timing that our government is typical, can bring to our attention to warn us, and we'll eventually fix this and get it right. It's just that people right now, currently, in their homes, with their families, with their children, it's a little extreme, it's a little severe what they feel they're experiencing, because we seem to be in a transition time of getting this right. And that's why a lot of the difficulty. So we seem to need to accelerate. But again, those 3 documents make an awfully strong case why a governmental body needs to stop this program in order to look into it 100% and completely, because we don't need proof. We just need strong evidence, and we certainly have that. Sorry I extended so long.
Oh, that's great. Good information. Thank you, Glenn. Let's go to, I believe, the caller on Skype. Go ahead.
Okay, great. Yeah, this is very, very valuable information, Glenn. Here in British Columbia, of course, we're benighted by Accenture, which is the former Anderson Consulting for Enron, which has gobbled up a third of the once proud BC Hydro Crown Corporation, as it's called, which was delivering a lot of revenue to the province. What we've got here is we've got 40 local governments that have opted for a moratorium by official declaration. And also the Union of British Columbia Municipalities is called for a moratorium as well. And what I just wonder is if you have any information about what would be the effect of opting out as regions, which is now what we're attempting to do for here on the Gulf Islands of British Columbia, for example. That's our intent. Do you know if the system would still work, or how would it work if certain regions were to say, no thanks, we don't want the spy meter?
I don't know. I want to be very candid. I really don't know. I'm not an electrical engineer. I'll tell you specifically. I teach management systems, environmental economics, and I teach statistics, because statistics is so important in those areas. And I typically teach graduate level when I teach, because undergraduates don't have background across enough areas to consider the entire system. So that's why I usually teach. But when you're asking me that question, I don't know the answer. So And again, I want to remind you people that I don't know everything about this. I know quite a bit about some very specific things, and I brought to your attention some specific documents that you can use to clarify some misinformation and some confusion in this area, because these statements about a few seconds, and it's true, though. It is, when they say a few seconds, maybe it is just for a minute a day. But when people are saying a minute a day and believing that, if they think that it starts at this minute and it ends a minute later, I think that's the interpretation that most people are understanding. Whereas if they realized that it was happening 24 hours a day for these brief blips, I think they would have a different impression and a less of a willingness to accept these meters. And obviously the opt-out is only a Band-Aid, because there's lots and lots of people that are not on this phone call and not familiar, and they deserve to be protected as well. In other words, It's not the kind of thing that somebody just fortunately happened to find out, someone heard from someone. What about the millions of people that only heard this is a new digital technology meter, and its representatives, don't be afraid of new technology. And so those people have children too. They have families. I believe they deserve the same treatment as people who are extremely familiar with the potential problems of this program. And someone mentioned it's just happening. These meters have been installed without communicating well at all to the public. And my question is, was this an intentional strategy? Because had these meters been communicated to the public, there's enough scientists and people that are aware around that would have brought the information we're talking about on this phone call forward, and then maybe they wouldn't have been able to deploy in the first place. So I'm wondering, was this a strategic decision on some of these utilities, these utility companies, in order to get them onto homes? Because it's a lot easier. What's the expression? It's easier to say I'm sorry than to ask permission. What's the exact expression?
It's easier to ask for forgiveness than permission.
So with that, Glen, I just want to, on behalf of all of our callers here, I just want to thank you so much for your time and for the explanation and helping us really get to the bottom of this this important issue, so that we can then get the information out there.
Great. Thanks so much, Josh, for inviting me, and thank you so much for handling the call.